We are live on Facebook.
We are live on Facebook.
Eventually, we got there. Well done, guys.
Um, excellent. Okay, well, welcome everybody to Scotland Christian Unions joined together. We're doing a series of events that we want to put on just because we want to share the hope that we have with everyone who's willing to hear about it. My name's Izzy. I'm a student at Edinburgh University studying psychology, and I'm joined by Isaac. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. I am studying at Stirling University. I'm also coming to you live. Eventually, we got there. Well done, guys.
Brilliant. And we're also joined today by Jeremy. Hi, Jeremy. Welcome.
Hey, Izzy. Hi.
Very good. We will shortly get into interviewing and getting your guys' questions for Jeremy. First of all, how are you guys doing today? Jeremy, how are you?
Yeah, I'm fine, thanks. Yeah, I'm isolating at home. I've just got out of hospital actually, so I'm really happy just to be able to walk around. It was a sort of odd experience to be in hospital. The corridors were empty. You couldn't leave your room. I'm pretty used to hospitals, and it was very different to the norm.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sure. Just a quick note for everyone. I will share my screen. Oh, I will not share my screen. On the Facebook page, we should be able to show you a link to Slido, which is like a website where you can put in any questions you have for Jeremy on, I'm going to say anything. He doesn't have to answer them, but I think he's willing to answer any questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. So you can put in any questions you have, and we'll get around to asking them shortly. I will make sure that's up there. I'll hand over to Isaac so we can get to know Jeremy a bit better.
Yeah, great. Let's get started with the questions. If that's all right, Jeremy. Start us off, Jeremy. Just tell us a bit about your background, your upbringing, kind of how your life started.
Sure. I was born in a place called Hemel Hempstead in Hertfordshire, which is famous for one thing, an experimental roundabout, and that, trust me, is the most exciting thing in Hemel Hempstead. So after university, I went to work, I'm afraid to say, in the City of London. I know, terrible, right? A banker of all things. I worked for 20 years for Credit Suisse all over the world. I worked in France. I did an MBA at INSEAD. And then I worked in Zurich and in New York, and then back to London. So yeah, that was great fun. And what I mainly did was working with wealthy people, what's called private banking. So that's advising some of the wealthiest people in the world on their finances. And then about 12 years ago, I got headhunted in the middle of the financial crash, in fact, to be the CEO of a family-owned private bank called C. Hoare & Co. It's an amazing place, founded in 1672. It's still owned by the Hoare family. That's Hoare, in case you were wondering. And it's on the 12th generation of family ownership. And I was fortunate enough to be the first ever non-family chief executive. So that was a great place to work.
Did you enjoy that work, or was it just too much stress at the time?
No, I loved it, especially the job with Hoare's. Yeah, and dealing with wealthy people is really interesting, Isaac, because they're like the rest of us. They've just got lots more money. But the interesting thing is, having lots of money doesn't make you happy. And some of the most miserable people I've ever seen are either wealthy clients or, in fact, wealthy people in the city. I think of one person in particular who I was very friendly with, who was the CEO of one of the world's biggest banks. And I had breakfast with him one morning in Zurich, and then a few days later, for reasons that have never really been explained, he committed suicide. Right. And things like that really shake you up and make you think, yeah, is money the great god that it's made out to be?
Yes, you got to know these people quite well, did you, on a personal level, just more than just your career?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you've got clients, they really get to know you. They trust you. They ask you their advice. Of course, that assumes you know what you're talking about, which may or may not be the case. And what you're trying to help them with is all the different complexity that having a lot of money entails. And there obviously can be a negative side to that, but there's also a good side. I think one big thing in private banking over the last few years has been philanthropy. And in fact, the Hoare family have been, some of Britain's leading philanthropists for hundreds of years. They were some of the main people bankrolling Wilberforce and the anti-slavery movement, for example.
Oh, wow. I guess this, I mean, it sounds like quite a successful job, quite a high up job in the banking world. Did you have success yourself? How did you personally find that?
Yeah, I enjoyed it, to be honest. I'm not complaining. Yeah, it was great. Basically, nothing really happened in my life bad. I had got 3 adult kids. Our daughter, in fact, was at St Andrews. And yeah, then one day, about 8 years ago, actually, just after Naomi went to St Andrews, my life changed forever. One day in the shower, I found this tiny lump on my rib, just like a small pea. I went to the doctor and the GP, and they said, it's just a fatty lump. It's nothing to worry about. But then you get checked out and passed from person to person. And maybe some people watching have been through that, or been through that with people in your family, because each person says, I'm not sure what that is. And eventually I got referred to the Royal Marsden, which only does one thing, cancer. And they said, you've got this really rare type of cancer. It's called a sarcoma. This was by now 2013. And it's curable, and you should be okay. So I went through treatment. I carried on working, which was maybe a bit stupid, for 6 months, and then for 2 years, up until almost exactly 5 years ago, everything went back to normal. And then one day, I was at a friend's house here in Sevenoaks, and it was a hot day like today, and I went to adjust my collar just here, and I felt this massive lump on my collarbone, like a golf ball, not like a pea. And I went back to the Marsden, and a few days later, I was waiting in the waiting room, and the nurse said, please come through. We walked down a little corridor, and on the way, she said, I'm really sorry. And that was the only warning I had, because when I got to the room, they told me, look, you've got tumors everywhere. We don't know how we've missed that in all the screening. And the cancer's metastasized. Actually, in the meantime, they decided it was another also rare type of cancer. And yeah, the obvious question you ask is, well, how long do you think I've got to live? Because they said that they can't cure me. And they said, well, who knows, but probably 18 months. So I burst into tears. Please don't think I'm some kind of amazing person or super cancer expert. Not at all. It's really hard to live with cancer. And the hardest thing is the impact it has on your family. So I had to do a sort of death drive around the UK. Our children were all at university. So I didn't want to tell them on the phone. So I drove to each university and told them. Although sometimes humour can be a relief. Our oldest son was at Lancaster University. When I got there, my wife and I, his mother, he said, oh, I thought the dog had died. So in a way, he was relieved it was only cancer. And yeah, it's been a really hard 5 years. I've been through 24 chemotherapies. I've also had big problems with my eyes. I've been blind for a while. I've recovered sight in one eye. I've also, as I was mentioning at the start, I've had big problems recently. I thought I had coronavirus, actually. I had a big fever, and I also had chest pains. And I went, and actually they decided, no, it's a heart problem. So I've done ophthalmology, I've done oncology, and now I'm on to cardiology. And I've just been told as part of the check, so you're going to have to restart chemotherapy next week. So yeah, I'm happy to be alive, but it's been very tough. I couldn't work. I never went back to the office, basically. From that moment 5 years ago, I've been in hospital, basically.
Yeah, so it sounds like you experienced a while ago what everyone else is experiencing in part now, with the sudden change of everything, your life coming to a halt. And in your book as well, you haven't mentioned it yet, but Jeremy's just written a book. You talk about fear and what that is like when you had that diagnosis and in the time since. Do you think you could talk to us a bit about that now?
Sure. Yeah, what I like to joke is welcome to my world, right? So in the last 5 years, every time I was on the train and somebody coughed or sneezed, I felt afraid, because I had no immune system, and I thought, oh no, I'm going to get some terrible bug. And now everybody feels like that, right? It's strange, isn't it? And yeah, what's the predominant emotion? It is fear. Fear of dying, I would say, maybe more than fear of death. And in a way that's accentuated now, because if you were seriously ill, as I was a couple of weeks ago, you're on your own. You can't even have a visitor. So yeah, it's been really hard, and I am afraid of dying. But the thing that makes the difference to me is the presence of Jesus Christ. Now, not in some supernatural way. I never had a vision or anything like that. But what I find is, when I look at God's word, which is what Christians believe the Bible is, a series of letters, if you like, from God to us, that they have tremendous promises. And maybe my favorite one is this. And I often remember this when I'm being wheeled in for operations. You think, well, will I come round, or what will they find? And I remember this verse from the Bible, which is a famous one. Yes, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. So I've been walking through that valley of the shadow of death for the last 5 years. Welcome to my valley. And it's made possible to keep walking because of the presence of God, who doesn't promise me or anyone a bypass around the valley of the shadow of death. For each one of us must die. What he promises us, which I find amazing, is his presence in the valley.
Amazing. And what is it about the presence of the person of Jesus, who you just mentioned, that is so remarkable in that valley? What have you found to be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, Izzy, the most important thing is hope, because my situation, humanly speaking, is hopeless. I'm alive, right? I feel fine, but there is no cure, and I can't get out of it. And I would suggest, I realize that this is oversimplifying, but just to keep it simple, there are two main worldviews. One view is the view ably put by our friend, Mr. Richard Dawkins, or Professor Richard Dawkins, who says that the universe speaks to us of its blind, pitiless indifference. Blind, pitiless indifference. There is no meaning, love, all the different human relations we have, it's all meaningless. The only thing that's happening is DNA is trying to perpetuate itself, and even DNA has no meaning whatsoever. That is a consistent view. The Christian view is that there is a God who made the universe, and that he gives us a way to get out of the mess we're in. So being a Christian is not about being good. It's not about going to church. It's not about being moral. It's about meeting and knowing a person, Jesus Christ. And what does he give me? And what can he give you? Hope. Hope in the face of death. And that's a very powerful human longing. Eddie Izzard, the transvestite comedian, was recently interviewed in The Guardian. And in the interview, Eddie said this. He said, all my life, I, Eddie, have been traumatized by the death of my mother when I was 6 or 7 from cancer. If only she or someone had come back through the clouds to tell us there's something there. If only she or someone had come back through the clouds to tell us there's something there beyond the grave. Well, when I read that, I was moved, because that is exactly the Christian claim. Yes, word for word, that someone did come back, and not only came back, but defeated death. Now, whether that's true or not, if you're watching and you're a bit skeptical, I understand that. And please get all your skeptical questions. Please ask far away anything you like. But that's what walking through the valley of the shadow of death with Jesus means to me. It means I have hope.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely a really big a thing for you, obviously. But what would you say to someone? You mentioned skeptical people there. Someone might hear that and say, that's all well and good, but there's just so much suffering in the world. Then surely there can't be a God, and if there is, he is allowing it. So yeah, what would your response be to that sort of question of why a good God would allow suffering, would allow the sort of suffering you've been through, and even at this time allow coronavirus and all this illness and anxiety that's going around?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Isaac, and I'll give you an answer, but please come back to me if you don't agree. My answer is not so much a philosophical one, it's a person. This is the Christian claim. There is a God who made the universe, and he made it good. Something has gone wrong. It's as if we're in a house at night and we hear smashing of glass, and 3 intruders have entered our house: fear, suffering, and death. And one of them, death, is going to kill us, and we can't get them out. So where did they come from? Well, the Bible doesn't give us a complete answer of where evil comes from. But if we're honest, there's not only evil in the world, cancer, coronavirus, traffic accidents, but there's also evil within each one of us. Each one of us, I'm a banker, right? I know that, but I think that's true of all of us, have done things that are wrong, and our relationship with God is broken. I therefore suggest to you that our biggest problem is not our physical death, it's what the Bible calls eternal death, separation from God, because God could justifiably throw us away. The wonderful Christian news is he doesn't. A man called Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German pastor who stood up against the Nazi persecution of the Jews, and he was sent to a concentration camp. And just before he was executed, he smuggled out of his jail cell a little piece of paper, and on it he wrote this: "Only a suffering God can help us." That's the Christian message. Only a suffering God can help us. Now, maybe, because I'm sure you're all very smart philosophers and theologians, you think, well, hang on a minute. If there is a God who made the universe, how can he suffer? He can suffer because he became a human being. That's what we believe, that the God who made the universe became a human being 2,000 years ago and walked the dusty streets of Palestine and suffered and was afraid. And I find that so comforting, that God can do something about my condition, but he also understands and empathizes because he's been there. Jesus was in a garden called Gethsemane the night before he was crucified, and he was afraid. He said, "Father, if it's your will, take this cup, the cup of suffering, away, but let not my will, but your will be done." I have no choice about cancer. I wish I did, but Jesus had a choice, because we Christians believe he was perfect. He hadn't done anything wrong. But he went to the cross because that's the only way to get us back to God, the only way that all the things that we've done wrong can be paid for by his death. He suffered in our place. And what motivated him to do that? Why did he do that? Because he loves us. Isn't that amazing? He loves us.
Yeah.
The Bible said God doesn't want anyone to perish, but everyone to come to him.
That is definitely a message of hope. And it's based on this life of Jesus that you talk about. But Jesus, let's face it, lived kind of 2,000 years ago. And I guess a lot of people think perhaps the historical record of him is fairly sketchy. So what would you say to just thinking, isn't this just a fairy tale? Is this just kind of wishful thinking? Is it really true?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's the $64,000 question, Isaac, because it's only helpful if it's true. Otherwise, it is total fairy story wishful thinking. So in my position, facing death, it's an acid question. Do I really believe it's true? Otherwise, it's just, as someone once said, a God delusion, right? Now, the reason I believe it's true is that I believe it's historically verifiable. I believe that if you were there on the morning of AD 33 or 34, Easter Sunday, that what the 4 eyewitness accounts say, that the stone was rolled away and Jesus came back to life, having been crucified 3 days earlier, really happened. Yes, he conquered death, he came back. And if that's true, that changes everything. If it's not true, then Christianity is the biggest con trick of all history, because approximately 2 billion people believe it. But if it is true, then it's utterly transformational. And it means you can know Jesus, not just also what happened 2,000 years ago, but you can know him now. And that's amazing. If you're watching it, in a few minutes, I hope I'm not going to get in trouble for this, but one of our kids needs a car to get around for his work. So we're going to buy a car, and the dealer is going to deliver it. And the dealer delivered it on Monday, but it had all kinds of problems. So I checked the tires, I looked under the engine, I said, you need to fix this, you need to fix that. So he said, fine, I'll go away, and he's coming back later. My point is, the Christian faith is like buying a car. Kick the tires, open the bonnet, have a look, decide for yourself. We have nothing to hide. We believe that the historical evidence stacks up that Jesus really did rise from the dead. If he did not, it's a waste of time. But if he did, it's the most important thing in the universe, more important than anything else, more important than your exams, your career, your family, anything else. It's utterly transformational. And that's Jesus's claim. He says, I am the resurrection and I am the life. You have to decide if that claim is true.
That's amazing, Jeremy. A big claim, which we'd love to encourage people to be thinking about. We've had a few questions through on the Slido already. Please keep sending them in, and we'll hopefully get to them. If not, we have people we can link you up with who can talk to you more about them. So we'll kick off with those, if that's all right with you, Jeremy.
Please, far away.
The first question is, I have a friend who is very scared of death. How do I start a conversation about it?
First of all, to be afraid of death is human, right? That's just the way we are. I'm afraid of death. I guess I would do two things, Izzy. First of all, I would try and ask them questions just to understand why they're particularly afraid of death. And just, I think as Christians, we need to listen to people, first of all. And secondly, I would point them to someone who I believe that the eyewitness accounts show us has two characteristics in the face of death. Jesus one day says to his disciples, let's go to this little village called Nain, N-A-I-N. It's about 20, 30 miles away. So his disciples probably thought, why are we going to Nain? That's an out of the way place. And as they're coming up at the end of the day into Nain, Nain is on a hill, they meet a funeral procession coming the other way. And the funeral procession is of a grieving widow because it's her only son who's died. And he must have died that morning. It's a hot country. People get buried straight away. And Jesus shows two characteristics face to face with death, which are the same characteristics that he had then and the same characteristics that he has now. First of all, he's full of compassion in the face of death. In the Greek, the word that's used for Jesus, his emotions, is splenknos animi, which means literally his intestines were twisted. So for your friend who's facing death, we can tell them this: the God who made the universe is moved by our predicament. He's moved. In fact, Jesus does something very strange. He reaches out and he touches the dead body, which no rabbi would normally do because you make yourself unclean. The second characteristic of Jesus is his power over death, because he says to the boy, get up, and the boy gets up and he gives him back to his mother. And then the whole thing does a U-turn, right? A 3-point turn in the road, and the funeral procession goes back. So I would say, what's Jesus like? He's full of compassion and he's full of power to defeat death. And the other thing from the story, which is obvious, is he meets us on the way to death, right? This poor widow grieving, she's going downhill. Death, if you like, is carrying off its prey. But Jesus is standing in the way, and he's standing in the way of each one of us as well. He doesn't want any of us to perish. So for me, what's death and suffering worse? It's worse because it's lonely. And there is a God man who meets us in our lonely way to death. And in fact, if we want to go to death on our own, we have to push past Jesus. So that's what I would try and do. Try and answer people's questions, understand where they're coming from, and try and point them to somebody who has the power over death, who owns death.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Jeremy. Thank you. The next question is from someone who is perhaps interested about your personal experience, and they're interested in knowing about whether you face any kind of opposition to your views, and they're specifically because of kind of the terminal nature of what you're facing. So yeah, I guess they're kind of realizing that of the nature of the illness that you have, and does that lead to anyone kind of disagreeing with you or telling you that you believe what you are?
No, that's a really interesting question. I would say, Isaac, rather the reverse, actually.
Right.
I think it's pretty difficult, although maybe someone's about to prove me wrong, to like attack someone in my position. No, I've found people really, I've got lots of friends in the city who are not Christians, and they're sort of a bit intrigued. And with quite a few of them, obviously I can't do it now in lockdown, but pre-lockdown, I just say, look, I found this amazing. Would you like to have a chat with me about the Bible, which is the kicking of the tires I mentioned earlier, the looking under the bonnet. So we just sit in a coffee shop or a bar or whatever and have a friendly chat and look at the evidence. And no, I've found people nothing but full of kindness and friendliness. In fact, a friend of mine who's a convinced atheist, which and this is in my book actually, which sadly I don't make any money from, being a foolish banker, but anyway, it's called Beyond the Big Sea, and it just came out recently. So in the book I quote a friend of mine who's a convinced atheist, and he said, I gave God a surprise this morning. I went into a church and said a prayer for you. So I was really touched by that. Actually, if I was being picky, I would say you don't need to go to church, you can say a prayer anywhere, but I thought that was really kind. So no, if you're a Christian and you want to be a better evangelist, get some really serious illness, it makes people very sympathetic. Yeah.
Excellent. You mentioned earlier about the historical claims. Could you talk a bit more about what it means about that first Easter Sunday? Why is that so important, and what should it influence in our lives?
Yeah, I mean, that's the central claim of Christianity, that Jesus did rise from the dead. And there are 4 eyewitness accounts which were written within a short period of Jesus's returning to heaven, which was actually on Thursday, what Christians call Ascension Day. And those eyewitness accounts were written by people and the friends of those people, many of whom died for their beliefs. So something must have happened to transform Jesus's followers, because when he was crucified, they all ran away and they were all terrified. And yet within a few weeks, they were all standing up in the center of Jerusalem, a few hundred yards away from where this crucifixion had happened, saying he's risen from the dead. Well, that doesn't make any sense unless it actually happened. Now, you can think of other possible explanations. If you chat to our Muslim friends, for example, they tell you that Jesus didn't really die. He was unconscious. But I think if you look at the eyewitness evidence, for example, in John, one of the eyewitnesses, a Roman soldier, to check that Jesus was dead, brutally thrust a spear into his side. And John, who was standing at the foot of the cross, said out of the wound came blood and water. Well, now we know that's pulmonary heart failure, that Jesus was dead. 2,000 years ago, they didn't know that. So the evidence I submit to you, but you must decide for yourself, and be as skeptical as you like, come with questions and doubts, strongly points to the fact that Jesus did rise from the dead. But it's more than just a historical fact. Henry VIII had 6 wives, right? Doesn't particularly mean anything. What matters is not just that 2,000 years ago that Jesus died and rose again, but that we can know him now, and also that he's going ahead of us. So Jesus's death and resurrection is both looking backwards, looking forwards, and here and now. And that makes all the difference in the world to me, facing death, that I can know him and I can be sure of his resurrection. Now, how did that happen to me? It didn't happen overnight. I never had some kind of dramatic Damascus Road experience. No, little by little, I started to look into it. There was a man called Frank Morrison who wrote a book some years ago called Who Moved the Stone? And this guy was very skeptical. He was a journalist, and he said, I'm going to write a book that debunks Christianity. And as he started to write it, and with an open mind, that's all I'd ask, please have an open mind, started to look into it. Eventually he became convinced, yeah, it really happened. And then something happened beyond that. He met Jesus Christ and know him. So being a Christian, again, all sorts of misunderstandings about it. What's the heart of Christianity is Jesus Christ and knowing him.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jeremy. We have a question from what I think is a medical or medical student. I know in Stirling we have a lot of nurses studying with us. What would you say to someone who, like a nurse who comes into contact with illness and death all the time, or perhaps someone with a family member, especially at the moment, who is very ill? How would you specifically perhaps share the gospel to that person, or to the ill person themselves?
Yeah, I think first of all, we obviously have to be sensitive, and especially in a work context, right? So I think the most important thing as a Christian is just to pray for sensitivity and kindness, and God will open the door. And I've never been a nurse or a doctor. I've been on the receiving end of lots of them, and they do an amazing job also. So God bless you in what you're doing. I would say in the situation I have been in more, which is dealing with another person, I would just again start by asking them some questions. I think and that obviously probably helps me, and I've had that many times with people who are ill because I'm in the same boat as them. Just to say, look, do you mind me asking, do you have any particular beliefs? That's one of my favorite opening questions. Do you mind me asking, do you have any particular beliefs? And then just listen to what the person says. And then if the person wants more, how can we share? I think often the best, gentlest, kindest way is just to read a psalm. That's what I would do. If someone, or if someone doesn't want a psalm, I think most people when I say, would you mind if I pray for you? I don't think anyone's ever said no, because if there is no God, right, you're just wasting your breath. And if there is one, it could make all the difference. But I would just read someone the 23rd Psalm, for example. The Lord's my shepherd, I shall not want. And I quoted several lines from that already. And the last lines are, goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And there's an intrinsic power in those words. We actually don't need to preach them a sermon. We can if we want, but that would be my advice. Just ask someone, would you mind if I read you a psalm?
Yeah, that's great. Really helpful, I think. We have a couple of questions which have been voted up by lots of people. So we'll start with this one. Someone asked, how do you answer the famous Stephen Fry quote of why would God allow bone cancer in children?
Yeah, look, I don't have a complete answer to that. And being a Christian is not about having every answer nailed down. And there are things in the world that are grievous. If you look at the Holocaust, for example, you know, how can that happen? How can God allow that to happen? I don't know. But this I do know, that there is a God and that he's trustworthy. He's trustworthy and that he is dealing with evil. And there is evil in the world. I think we have to be really clear on that there is evil in the world, not just natural evil, but also personal evil. You know, cancer or coronavirus is one thing, but in a way much worse is human cruelty and abuse to other humans. What we can say is that God experienced suffering. So anything that we go through, anything that I go through, the God-man, Jesus Christ, as to his humanity, went through far worse, which is why only a suffering God can help us. So the Christian God is not a remote God who just, if you like, put the world in motion and then disappears. No, he intervened. He came into the world. And why did he come? He came to rescue us from cancer, coronavirus, from brutality, abuse, and all the multiple evils of this world. And he died for us. So the Christian claim is this, which if you think about it is mind-blowing, that the creator God who made the whole universe, 75 trillion light years across, 200 billion galaxies, each one with over 200 billion stars, that God became a human being and suffered. And suffered why? Suffered to save us. So if Stephen Fry asked me that question, that would be my answer. I'd be fascinated to know as to what he'd say. But I don't have a complete philosophical answer for all the ins and outs of why things happen, but I know a person who does.
Okay, yeah, and we'll go with one more question. I'm sure we could go on for a while, but we don't want to keep everyone too long. We'll go with the other question that has received a kind of a lot of votes on the Slido, which is, has the suffering you faced changed your faith? And kind of asking personally, have you ever had times of doubt in your faith?
What I felt, Isaac, is I felt, why me? Yeah, I've never been angry with God, but friends of mine in similar situations have. And first of all, I'd say that's okay. Be honest with God. If you do feel angry with God for something that happened in your life, that's okay. There's a great book in the Bible about a man called Job. And Job, terrible things happen to him, and he's very, very angry with God. He's raging against God. And he has these three friends who come along and try and help him, but they're worse than useless, actually. And at the end, God says something. God speaks to Job, and he says something surprising. He says, Job, you better pray for your three friends because they haven't spoken well of me as you have. So God can cope with all our emotions. And I've felt, why me? And I don't really know the answer to that. But maybe one answer is, otherwise, frankly, I wouldn't be having this call right now, right? And the Christian message is that suffering can be redemptive. That suffering can be redemptive. It can be very unredemptive, but it can be redemptive. And where do we see that most of all? We see that on the cross, because the cross appears to be the triumph of evil. A completely innocent man in a kangaroo court on trumped up charges is nailed to a piece of wood when he's never done anything. And in fact, Christians believe he's God incarnate. But out of that tragedy, evil, comes a tremendous blessing on the whole human race, which is a way back to God, a way that our sins can be forgiven, a way to be right with God, a way to have hope. So I don't really understand why it's happened to me, but I believe there is a purpose in everything that happens, and I believe that God is trustworthy. I believe what's God like, we can trust him.
Yeah, that's great, Jeremy. Thank you. And I think that's a good place to end it on that note. So thank you very much, Jeremy, for joining us today. And thank you for all those answers to quite difficult questions. And thank you to everyone that is watching and to everyone who sent in questions. Sorry that we didn't get time to answer them all. But yeah, just before we go, just point you in a few directions, especially for those that did ask questions that didn't get answered. Next week, we have lots of events going on. You can find out all about them on our Instagram and on our Facebook, which is where you're watching this. So you should be able to find that fairly easily. Yeah, so we have events in the evening next week and events in the daytime as well. You can see the details there on Facebook. We also, on that Facebook page, have a few feedback forms. We'd love to know what you thought of today, what you thought of the event. So there's a feedback form there. And there was also a form there if you have more questions, if you have a response to Jeremy, or if you'd like some answers, then just fill that out and one of us will get in touch with you about perhaps someone from your own university, if you're at university, you can talk to. And the final resource that I'll point you to that we have a link to on the Facebook page is an information about doing a book called Uncover, which is basically a resource that goes through one of the Gospels, which is one of the accounts of Jesus' life that Jeremy mentioned on several occasions. It goes through that kind of step by step, and there are people at the CUs across Scotland that would be more than happy to go through that with you online, to chat through your questions, to chat informally about ideas and questions that you have about Jesus. But that's it for now, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again to Jeremy for joining us, and have a good day, everyone. See you later.